Hey, hey, happy Friday. Woohoo. Thank you so much for your flexibility as I had to reschedule this week's weekly live show. But anyway, welcome to this week's influential live show. I am your host, Stacy Rasky. I'm a leadership mentor and culture creator, empowering entrepreneurs and executives to be the leader they to be inspired to follow, while creating a purpose-driven culture that values people, performance, and profit. So today's special topic is all about how to improve accountability with your team and, of course, yourself, because anywhere we're improving accountability, responsibility, and really at the foundation of both of those boundaries, we're going to be a better leader. So I'm going to break down the 4 main challenges, what to do about it, so you can have better results and better accountability within your ecosystem to improve people, performance, and profit. So let's dive in. Obviously, if you're watching us live, be sure to share in the comments. If you're catching the replay, #replay. I would love to hear your biggest takeaways from what I share with you today. So backstory on why this is such an issue. I speak all over the country. I talk to entrepreneurs and executives from all facets, all businesses. And the number one challenge I always hear from every single one of them when I ask the question, how is accountability within your ecosystem? And they're like, thumbs down, not good, it's terrible, or even just could be better. And it is such a foundational element in my influential framework for a high performance culture that underneath, like, the foundation is identity, the identity of the ecosystem of the culture, whether we're talking about the individual leaders and just having clarity on their own values, stepping into the identity of the leader they need to be to really influence the culture and the ecosystem. But at the organizational level, the identity is, what is the mission and purpose of this organization? What are our core values? You know, we've got to know the why. We've got to know the values upon which everything will be based. And once we get clear on what the identity is, the next step for leaders and for organizations is accountability. It's absolutely vital. And when there's a breakdown in accountability, it's hard to improve things like communication, development, innovation, creativity, all of those things in that development space, or even whatever the results are that we want. Do we want better performance? Do we want better client and employee retention? Do we want to increase profit? Whatever those goals are, we have to have accountability. And this applies even if you're an ecosystem of one. It doesn't matter if you're a solopreneur. You still have to set up all of these systems for self-accountability within your business to be the leader, but to also be an employee for yourself since you're in that role. And so we've got to have those accountability and checkpoints. So I'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments. What is your biggest challenge with holding others accountable as a leader? There's always a lot of common themes. Now, one of the key elements too is I will challenge you to think about, before we dive into today's 4 key areas to shift, is where else do you see challenges with accountability? Do you see this at home? So for example, when I hear about accountability issues within an organization, I will always ask the leaders, how are you with accountability with your kids if they have them? Are you good at holding to consequences when they don't stick to the boundaries you've set? And if there's no consequences at home, because again, how we do one thing is how we do everything. It's the exact same energy that they're bringing into the workplace. There's no accountability. And if they do set clear guidelines, which we'll get into that because that's one of the issues, is there are no consequences when people don't follow through with the benchmarks that have been set. It's that simple. Because at the end of the day, if your business is your baby, as a leader, we are kind of there to parent our employees in a functional way, not a dysfunctional way, but in a functional way, because we are the ones setting the standards for the ecosystem, for the culture. And they have to learn to adapt, making sure it's in alignment with them to begin with as an employee. But they, we set those standards the same way we do with our kids. If things are not working in one ecosystem, I'm certain it's showing up elsewhere. So, number one, this is the simplest thing to fix because it's an external thing. It's tactical and usually a very low bar to entry. Number one is a lack of systems for accountability. It is that simple. How will you hold people accountable? So for myself, internally, we have weekly accountability for our employees. We're always checking on, we know what the task list is, we know where the projects are at, we know what the deadlines are, and just having that weekly check-in of, hey, where are you at on these things? We know what that is. We have some of that stuff systematized and automated. Some of those systems are regularly scheduled meetings to have those conversations and checkpoints. And we have some additional systems, project management software, messaging software, different things like that. So it's crafting your plan of systematizing so that it helps kind of sabotage proof, because sometimes our bandwidth is maxed out. We've got a lot of stuff on our plate. So it's really hard to remember or to show up for the type of accountability we need to do, or to help even eliminate any of the stuck points internally that we have around accountability. So the key is creating those systems. Now, for my clients, we also have a very automated system for reminding accountability, because sometimes you as the leader, that's another aspect to your organization, is you may need to hold clients accountable to move projects forward. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you at any part require the client to be involved in the process of moving the needle forward on whatever it is you're doing with them, whether it's feedback on the project, they need to do something to help support it, whatever that is, we have to have accountability where there's automated check-ins. If they're given basically an assignment or homework, and then you give them a due date, which is important, that there's some sort of a system to follow up and check in. How's it going? Hey, we don't have this yet. What's up? Right? We've got to have that follow through. So what are the systems you need to make it easy? Do you need to pre-schedule emails or text messages within your CRM software? Do you need to preset up some type of reminders for them to complete check-in forms? So those are the type of things to think about when it comes to the needs of your organization, whether it's just yourself. This accountability applies to your team. And again, it's nice with like project management software because it'll automate certain reminders around due dates. You can just set all that stuff up. And then same thing with your clients. Once that's done, challenge number 2 comes with that clarity piece that I just mentioned. So clarity in general. Have you clearly communicated the expectations? Do the people you are holding accountable know exactly what it is you're holding them accountable for? You'd be amazed how often there's a miss in that situation. Like, it's a lot. So within an organization or just within your team, is everyone clear on their roles, on their responsibilities? Do they know what their lane is? Do they know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do? Because again, accountability is also about responsibility, and people need to know very clearly what are those expectations. And that's why I said, did you communicate a due date? So there's certain elements to accountability that a lot of people just forget. Okay, so you ask somebody to do something. When is it due by? What needs to be included for you to consider it done? And have you double checked in the feedback loop of communication to make sure they actually understand what it is that you're asking them to do? And then also clearly communicating and requesting, do they need anything in return to make sure that they are set up for success. Like there's this whole breakdown in the feedback loop in the communication, which lends to our next problem. Number 3, communication. One of the biggest pain points with regard to accountability is communication. Now, the challenge most the leaders have is they actually do not know how to effectively communicate either the delegation side. And hello, for those of you like myself who are recovering control freaks, who the concept of delegation and actually doing it's kind of new and just difficult in itself, let alone trying to communicate all the chaos and magic that's in your head to somebody else who is not you to do it and to do it correctly. Even if it's not doing it exactly the way you would do it, that it still gets done with the desired result. Let me know if you understand what I'm talking about. It's always a tough one. So the challenge with the communication feedback loop that I already alluded to, right, is making sure we have, this is where systems comes in, right? It helps us know I'm not forgetting the information if you have that checklist of what are all the questions that need to be answered and what are all the details that need to be communicated for someone to have everything they need to move forward on a project, a task, whatever it is that you're asking them to do that you inevitably will hold them accountable for because they are responsible for it. So there's that piece, clearly communicating information. And if you've ever had issues delegating and you're that big thinker, visionary type personality, such as myself, that can be really hard to do because it requires us slowing down and being present for the conversation. It requires us coming to the conversation with a plan, not just rambling off something in the night, that idea that we got, and not revisiting that to have a full, clear conversation around all the details of this project. So giving and receiving this feedback or instruction just is falling apart. Another aspect to communication is the communication skills around having those tough conversations. Accountability quite often means, hey, this was due. Why is this not done yet? Right? And so we're starting to go down a path of tough conversations because now as the leader, it is our job to reflect back to them this accountability, this, hey, these were the expectations and what's going on. Because our own experience with communication, especially around accountability and feedback, has always included two things. This is the example that was set for us as children, that accountability only meant, or let's just say hard conversations around accountability only meant two things: shame or blame. That's it. So we basically are lacking skills around effective communication as a leader. We don't know how to hold someone accountable without judgment and rejection, because that's shame and blame, right? It's judgment and rejection. It makes us feel like shit because that is our wounded inner child driving the show because we're avoiding the hard conversations. Let me know if you know there are some tough conversations you're avoiding in your life, whether it's at home, with your team, maybe some clients, whatever it is. There's somewhere we tend to avoid those tough conversations. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes those tough conversations need to be with ourselves, right? Taking off that mask and get radically honest with ourselves about who we're being and why we're not showing up when it comes to holding ourselves accountable. We committed to our goals. We committed to our habits and routines. Well, let's get honest about why we're not following through. Because again, we go right down into the shame and blame, and it's all guilt, resentment, judgment, rejection of ourselves. So we don't know how. And obviously, most of us care about other people in our ecosystem, so we don't want them to feel that way. And I'm not going to go down digress down the whole thing about not being able to control other people's feelings, but we know as leaders, we want to create a safe space. So, how can we have those tough conversations without bringing in attitude, without bringing in shame and blame? Well, that means you got to work on your own shit. If you're healing your own inner shame, and remember, the deepest shame we have is not enough. And that shows up a lot like imposter syndrome for those of you who've done a lot of work around the not enough. The next layer of work when you're doing it, it's going to look at things like comparison, imposter syndrome, all of that. So it's still there, doubt monster, but we'll save that for another training or another live show. And you can always check, obviously, all the other video trainings we have, because I have talked about that a lot. The inner critic, the bitch voice, the doubt monster, the imposter syndrome, all of that stuff. So because we don't feel good or are not showing up in that place of confidence with our communication skills and our ability to have those tough conversations without expectations, attachments, or judgment, we just avoid it. We don't do it. Versus leaning in and just saying, hey, this is what we agreed on. Here's all the stuff. It's not done. And just asking, like, what happened? What's not working? Right? We can go into those conversations easily without any of the blame, shame, or judgment. But we've got to be in the right space to do it. So it's avoiding the consequences more than anything. Because if we're holding somebody accountable and then on top of it, they didn't do it, they communicate. So then key is we work with them to craft a plan to ensure their success. What is missing from the scenario? And then that leads into the last piece, which is owning your role, owning your responsibility as a leader. That when it comes to consequences and that feedback loop, when you're holding somebody accountable, is also taking ownership of your role in the situation. If you're leaning in to have that hard conversation around accountability with somebody and they didn't meet a deadline, due date, follow through, didn't meet expectations, you've also got to be willing to own your role in the situation and say, hey, where did I not set you up for success? How can I be better? And make sure you have everything that you need. Are you willing to do that? As the leader, your team can only be as good as you are leading them. And a lot of us are in that space where we've not quite owned the role of becoming the leader. You're still too stuck as the doer, the operator, not the owner, the doer, instead of being the leader that's creating the container for effectively high-performing team and high-performance culture. And that requires us doing that work, to be in that place of ownership, to be in the place of personal responsibility and accountability, to have these epic boundaries, to be willing to be better and learn how to communicate so that we can have consistent and effective accountability done in a way that actually elevates our employees, elevates our team to perform better without any of the shaming, the blaming, the bullshit. They're able to show up as the best that they are, which is huge at the end of the day, because your job now is to be the leader that supports them in really shining in all of their genius. But if we're not doing that for ourselves, it's hard to nurture others to do that as well. So making sure you are owning your role to improve all of these things that we talked about today. Owning your role in the situation to make it better for your team members, that they are set up for success and that accountability becomes something good that challenges them to improve their performance because you are setting them up for success, where accountability becomes simply problem solving and you clearly knowing without emotion what those consequences are when somebody doesn't meet expectations. I think oftentimes as leaders who are high empathy, and I always talk about that with us natural born alpha leaders, that even when we've not been in the space of truly leading, we're functioning from this high sensitivity and the high sensation seeking, right? The empathy and sensitivity to emotion and energy, and obviously the drive, right? We've got that crazy perpetual motion engine that just never stops. But it's that empathy that gets us caught because we know someone's potential and their capacity. And too often we treat them based on the potential that we are hoping they step into. We pay them for that potential, we nurture that potential, and what we end up doing without consequences and accountability is actually enabling them to not perform better when there are no consequences. And what are those consequences? Going back to the clarity, when people are not following through and meeting expectations and standards, there's a certain point where you've got to be willing to let them go and not constantly be hoping they'll step into their potential. Let me know if you've ever experienced that before, because that's, again, some of those tough conversations that we avoid. So it's more empowering for someone to be let go from a situation where they're not showing up there fully and as their best than keeping them and hoping that they'll improve and step into their potential. Because really what's happening is they're constantly in a place where they're not really being accepted for how they're showing up in the present. It's always this pressure to be someone else. So we've got to be willing to create that space for who they are right now and how they're showing up. If they're willing to lean in crafting that plan to help improve, and you work together, you and them, or together as a whole team to nurture and develop because they want to, that's one thing. That's a great culture. But sometimes people are just not in alignment as you're making changes in your leadership and you're solidifying your values, mission, purpose within the organization, that identity, and improving the accountability. They may clearly be self-identifying themselves as no longer in alignment with where you're going. And so they're constantly underperforming, and you've got to be willing to let them go. That's an empowering move, to let them go rather than continuing to enable them to be subpar. And obviously that's going to undermine you as a leader and the culture you're creating. And it's definitely going to impact productivity, performance, everybody else, all the other people in your organization, and definitely undermine profit. Nobody wants a turd in the punch bowl. So, all right. I would love to know from you, what is your number one takeaway from the conversation today? Of course, if you are checking this out on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on reminders, because we are sharing these amazing conversations, insights, and trainings every single week. And for those of you in my fantastic Facebook community, I would love for you to share your greatest takeaway and continue engaging in our amazing, influential leadership space, because it is such a great group of high vibe, positive, amazing leaders and impactors in the world. So, of course, if you want to learn more about how you can do the work to elevate all of these things that I talked about today, reach out, hit me up in the DMs. You can check me out at stacyraske.com. And of course, message me. We can always connect and send you the link to book a chat on our calendar, or get a call on our calendar, so we can talk about what those options are for working together and potentially get an invitation into our amazing influential ecosystem. So otherwise, have an amazing week. Of course, I will not see you next week because it is a big, big week. It is our big event for the year, our Influential Freedom Summit. So I may pre-record a training, but I'm going to say more likely than not, it's going to be such a busy, crazy week. We are not going to have a training next week. So the last week of January, nothing's going to be on there. But then the following week, we'll have some big, amazing takeaways from the Freedom Summit that I can't wait to share, because this is our one big event for the year. If you've not gotten your tickets, head over to beinfluential.com, because doors are closing this weekend. That's it. Doors are closing. And if you didn't know, this is our only event of 2023. A lot of people are like, I'll catch the next one. I'm like, all right, 2024 it is. And they're like, wait, what? Yeah, no more, no more for 2023. That's it. So be there or be square. Beinfluential.com. Grab those tickets. We have a few seats left. So I look forward to seeing you there. And I know I will catch you on the flip side soon enough. And remember, as always, you are enough. Time to be that leader you'd be inspired to follow. Have an amazing, great week. See you soon.